Okay. Hello, everyone. I have around 20 minutes to speed through the last talk for tonight's episode and for the 2019. It's going to be the new year soon. So hopefully, in 15 minutes, I get the ideas out for this year. This is an episode that's significant for me. Everybody can watch this later, so nobody has to actually watch this exactly at live stream. But, anyways. So this is you can say it's a personal episode. Anyways, I'm gonna get into it. The idea that came was broken walls of the thoughts we inhabit. For a long time, I've wondered about intelligence and eventually realized that it has two components. It has an objective component where we ascribe our intelligence to our environment and what is visible, and it has a sort of component where it's unobservable. In some sense, um, um, by the way, guys. Okay, it's better. Was testing. Um, by the way, guys, anybody listening now, I recommend you go and be with family and friends. I'm just recording an episode for the last one of 2019. So feel free to not tune into this. Like I appreciate if you guys actually who's tuned into here, go be with friends and family. I'm just trying to get certain ideas out before 2019 ends. You know. Anyways, let's continue. So the broken walls of the thoughts we inhabit. I wondered about intelligence. I realized that in some sense it has different components. It has an objective component, it has a subjective component. The subjective component has design, but is not visible, is not tangible. The objective component is solid and it's static. So when we wonder about our eyes, when my eyes are open, matter and reality and that which is in visible sensory data begins to kind of become important to reference to. If you're living in a material world and you don't acknowledge its material, that is in some sense you can say an ignorance. But if you have acknowledged its material, now are wondering what else it is, then the mystical quest becomes open and in some sense animated. So what is this idea? I want you to imagine a room you're in right now. Imagine a room with stone walls. Imagine any kind of stone you want. In a room with stone walls. Now I want you to imagine suddenly the walls begin to crack. It's as if there's this Rumi quote where he says, "A secret freedom um, is in a crevice. In a crevice that you can barely see, there's a secret freedom," something like this. And I want you to imagine Rumi says this, and suddenly, like the wall that you're visualizing of the room with the stone walls, imagine it breaks. I just want to give you an idea that a sort of wall changes. Imagine you're in a room and a certain part of the room changes. Now, I consider that the human being is in a subjective room. Of course, this subjective room is in its own free will. But if the person identifies as a thought, its free will can be manipulated by what happens to the thought or how the thought is communicated. So in some sense, the broken walls of the thoughts we inhabit is even, it's going towards this idea that man is not just living in an objective room, we're also living in subjective rooms. And when you see people, for example, on the street anywhere, every person is kind of has a relationship with the cultural program, with how they feel their environment arises as their intelligence. So the idea is that there is a lot of language where I can say without language, human beings, um, their communication will just be limited to body language. I consider a belief to have architecture. I consider beliefs, they are born out of certain dualistic axioms. When you find the foundation of an idea, it tends to usually be an experience and the context where that experience is founded. Human beings are acknowledging themselves as objective beings, but the intelligence part of it subjectively occurs. Consciousness is a mystery simply because it escapes many patterns, many familiar patterns. You know, there was a person named Fermat. He had a last theorem. Pretty much, it became a millennium question. This mathematical proof that anybody who proved it would get $1 million. And a person by the name Andrew Wiles, I'm not sure. He, in some sense, proved it. And they asked him, "How did you prove it?" And then they asked him, "Did Fermat, at his time, could he have had the answer?" Fermat claimed he had his own proof. He had proven this kind of unique geometrical relationship he had discovered. And so what happens is that Andrew Wells says, the only way I was able to solve it was with a new branch of mathematics that had developed after Fermat's time. So we have to take into consideration many things are moving into intelligence. A very tiny percentage is conscious to the human being. Right now, I am not speaking as a giant putting the world on my shoulder. I am speaking as someone on the shoulder of a cosmos, on the shoulder of this giant cosmos. So what I mean is that the mind, when it associates, let me say it like this: instead of mind, I'm going to say attention, because that's the ultimate discovery. When a person moves beyond the language threshold, they become a creature of natural presence of attention. So right now, for example, my words move and my attention is in some sense static and sometimes dynamic. But there are moments where it's as if it's very fascinating. It's like instead of anything moving around me, I move within myself. So what I mean by that is the idea of self suddenly can be seen to be transitory, you know. 2020 will be a year where literally in 30 minutes it would be a year where I'm kind of giving myself freedom to release certain designs. I feel that knowledge is literally like the educational system is like a Titanic, and people are wondering where to jump to. You know, an inefficient system always brings forth escapist mentalities. That means when you see members of a civilization want to escape the civilization, that's like a very large sign there's inefficiency in the system. The subjective realm, the subjective component to one's moment of being, in accordance to how many memories the person is conscious of, how many ways the moment has been segmented. The person remembers with added dimensions or not. So, in other words, an idea gains emotional momentum. You can say a person can become from an idea when that idea has struck a chord with a certain past memory or a pattern. You see, of course, when you look at the biology, it's a vast accumulation over time. Now, we tend to think we can change our minds in an instant, but at the same time, there's a sort of notion that the objective evolution it sacrificed itself to be a mind. That means, do you know how important it was in the history of all existence when man opened his eyes not to just the world but to himself? That means the creature wasn't conscious. You can say at first, perhaps in the very primitive stages, let's go even more primitive than the caveman, like a little bit more primitive, and we'd see it be just like a creature exerting force. So the relationship, it's as if we have come into manifestation as a creature through a sort of attention oscillating. What I mean by that is due to the temporary nature of identification with the moments that we journey through. And journeying is not just an external thing. One can journey as the content of the moment or as the moment. And that's when the walls of thought break, when life gains an importance where it can't be divided anymore. It's like you won't let that military tactic of divide and conquer. Believe it or not, when you really look at knowledge, for me, I can totally see like all the branches of knowledge as geometrical shapes drawn on an empty page. The roar of our moments into an ever present now. It's very fascinating. Life is honestly, for the creature, just a game of effort. That's it. Deeper dimensions of the universe don't open up unless there is an honest kind of trusting in the moment kind of effort. That means think about it this way: if you can't trust your moment, how are you going to trust what happens to your moment? It's all about the attention, realizing it's here. And if we consider we're living in our thoughts right now, now I want to take your attention to the texture and the design of the walls of your beliefs as a human being. Because human beings have different eyes, different DNA, it in some sense suggests that every creature's mind energetically, let's say, like I could say every person's philosophy has a unique geometrical shape. You know, you can totally translate language into anything. It's a sort of inner misdirection that the creature has to do. The creature has to be blind to the whole thing so it's real to what it sees, what it wants to see. And certain people have a relationship that they're like, how can I control my emotions? How can I control my thoughts? I'm just this animal that's just evolved. What are you saying, man? You know? And of course, that's one view, but there's a view that human beings on this planet have had where thoughts were like the leaves of a tree. The seasons passed, it changed. The spirit of the moment, it's all atoms, but what is animating it is the inspired new effort. The main point of my kind of talk, I guess, with this title is that in some sense, realize people are not just living in an objective universe. They're living in a subjective universe, and that subjective universe is organized in accordance to how they have experienced life so far, how they have articulated why the hand of the free will is open. You see, I sometimes will wake up and I'm just like, it just on when I was younger, people would tell me, I didn't even think about it, but people would tell me I would smile a lot, you know? And it would be moments where I wouldn't even realize I'm smiling. Like there wasn't even a sort of happy sadness to the moment. It was just the moment was balanced in its own eyes. I consider that the thing is, let me tell you, this is how kind of it is. And all right, I got a bit more time. And by the way, guys, I'm going to repeat this again. I'm just recording this talk for personal reasons at this point because it's about to be the New Year's. Go and be with your family and just appreciate in a still mind the livelihood of your environment. Sometimes being alive is the greatest thing you can do. I find it so fascinating that psychology is so behind in the cultural program that it's as if like we are experiencing the kind of consequences of our subjective evolution, but the species doesn't even consider a subjective evolution yet. We think we are just throwing thoughts in thin air. But these thoughts, if they can have meaning, purpose given, you got to ask yourself the question after. Like, so what that means is sometimes when I think about things, I wonder like a couple questions ahead. You can say like in chess this often occurs. The person is contemplating like a couple realities ahead, potential parallel realities ahead. A question is a chance to review, simply. Questions exist to bring self-awareness. Answers exist to bring inspiration of the self and awareness. That means in 2019, I'm telling you, all those people who are trying to find truth, guess what? You have to take responsibility for your free will as a moment, as a novel moment. There's nothing that you can say. One can bathe the body with the elements, with water, and so one in some sense bathes their mind with a sort of viewpoint on the whole world. You can say it's just like a t-shirt. Like imagine if you still like if this is hilarious, but imagine like you're like 10 years old and you have a shirt on, and now imagine like a t-shirt, and now imagine you suddenly grow 10 years of time like in a minute. That shirt would kind of like it would reach a point where it would suffocate you, or you would rip the shirt apart. Do you know? So what I mean by that is it's like the shirt is a metaphor for thought. Thought is a metaphor for how the state of mind is being acknowledged. We're using photography in our subjective realms and calling it thinking. It all has to do with angles of images. It all has to do with the presence of attention in a moment where phenomenology is just here. You see, wisdom means look first, then act. And this is why those who, regardless of what banner of intelligence you carry, if you act first without looking first, you in some sense either should have seen ahead or in some sense are risking it. Let me tell you what causes suffering. The fact that it's the only interpretation. Do you know I have so many days of my life I have taken myself out of philosophical conception. I have broken my own ideas. I have literally like raised a great vision. Like suddenly I saw things in a unique way. Then it was as if like Thor's hammer out of the sky fell on that thought. And then from the shattered remnants of the past, I wondered how the future is going to move. And I realized it's all about civilization's ability. Something unique happened in regards to a sort of narrative sense. Just a second, guys. Okay. Pretty much, I find that a human being is advanced as it is aware. Now, it is obvious that we are imperfect creatures. This is why they said it is human to err. It is normal to make errors. That means you can't expect Earth to be like heaven, you know? Imperfection, in simply attempting its greater potential, has done what it can. I find people are worried about failing two kinds of positions. One is failing the world, and the second one is failing themselves. Now, many human beings are succeeding themselves, but their world is failing. It is failing not because it is not passing the test of civilization. It's maintainable. The reason it's failing is because its greater potential is not brought forth. There's no such thing as teaching. There's just creatures that open their eyes in existence and wonder. And what I'm trying to get to is that we have been inhabiting stories to a degree where we're identified as characters, and so these characters have now been into, like, they are an intersection. It's as if the ego is chained to the earth. Without a material foundation, there is no. It's like, who can have an ego if there's no body? Right? So the ego is chained to an earth. It's the part of the subjective self that is earthbound. And there's a part of the subjective self that is watching it from the sky of that earth. So in some sense, we got to understand, like, at some point, this is something, of course, I speak about it. There can be many people who can challenge this view, but it's simply this idea. How would I say? It's this idea, like, broken designs can no longer break. At some point, language is going to be realized that the free will is using it the same way the body consumes food, the mind consumes data. And what is data? More vaster vision. Now, if a human being seeks too much vision with too much of an ego, the ego dissolves in the process. What that means is karma snaps the being out of their subjective position. But there are moments where the person, after really going with the pace of the objective realm, so it's like the first act of life is like fit into the environment, go along with the program. After you've been in the program for some time, now review the whole program, the whole constitution of a subjective landscape, objective landscape, a sort of non-dual witnessing experience. It's like, really, when I look in the mirror, because for me, before I wonder about, like, other, like, when the concept of soul was introduced to me, I kind of looked at the mirror and I'm like, is there something in those eyes? you know and I noticed that if there is a soul, its conscious expression is free will, it's choice. That means imagine all the esoteric societies of the world, all the superstition and magic and everything, all of that suddenly kind of becoming hollow in an instant. Reality is Reality is a opportunity of a lifetime. So, guys, before I end this talk off, strangely, I have the Sun Tzu Art of War, that book, and I'm just going to open a random page and we're going to end the talk. All right. So, Sun Tzu from the Art of War, I think Zhang Yu. What is this? There's a passage that says from the Art of War, the skillful warrior takes his stand on invulnerable ground. He lets slip no chance of defeating the enemy. Now, instead of enemy, think of it as like your goal or whatever challenge you want to overcome. Then it says the victorious army is victorious first and seeks battle later. The defeated army does battle first and seeks victory later. So it's the will. And one more, the last part, he says the skillful strategist cultivates the way and preserves the law. Thus, he is master of victory and defeat. Yet that means this dude, this whole book, guys, is about him saying even in war, he's abiding by the Tao. So, anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. Pretty much, just to recap, I guess, I wanted to suggest simply that we have a relationship with language as creatures in 2019 and 15 minutes before 2020. In 2019, guys, we human beings have a relationship with language. And that relationship with language has been as if it's a vehicle we've entered and we've forgotten we've entered it. And upon further examination, the creature realizes they can never be a subjective portrait hung on the wall of the mind forever. Thoughts come and go, images go, the body changes, your mind changes, but really what is there observing the phenomenology of the mind, that is attributeless, and it has been poetically just like the X factor named soul. So the word soul, it never had a definition. It was like the X factor in a mathematical equation, that unknown X factor, that unknown variable, right? Because it was attributeless, but it was the mover in some sense, right? So there's many ways that the world has opened up through language. Mr. Within is just suggesting an awareness to language that will make the person liberated in realizing they have a choice of not only the objective rooms, just physically what you do, but you have a choice to also subjectively move. It's kind of like if there's space, creative space, creativity just emerges. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in and Happy New Year.